Project Lawful aka Planecrash by Arwayne aka Eliezer Yudkowsky and Lintamande.
After some recovery time with only Splendor boosted, he tries getting a Fox's Cunning, which takes him to +4 +0 +6 over baseline 18, 16, 14, innate +3 +4 +5. When nothing bad seems to happen to him after a few minutes, he applies an Eagle's Splendor to himself and takes off the +6 Splendor headband, which takes his stats to 25, 20, 23. It does not appear to send him back to the way he was before. His emotions weaken but do not vanish. So he puts on the +4 +0 +4 headband before the spells run out to stabilize his stats at 25, 20, 23. You can't really get much done with only INT 21 is the problem. He doesn't know, in retrospect, how Dathilani, who are only +2 SD intelligence, get through life. He sure didn't get far on +0 at HD. Well, probably it's that nearly all Dathilani never try to do anything really complicated. Or if they do, they take a lot more time to do it. And he goes back to work, or tries to. He is still tired inside. The lack of a concrete deadline on how long he needs to keep this up is not helping, especially at only Splendor 14 +5 +4, which, he suspects, does not end up the same thing to a Dathilani as Splendor 14 +5.4 is supposed to be to most Galarian natives. But INT 25 is enough for him to go back to his Emisom, Magical Simulation of Magic, crafting attempt. He's gathered by now that baseline is not the key to wording wishes, that there is something that takes language and goes from there to a spell pattern, and that is why wish phrasings matter so much. When he gets to INT 29, he will cast Arcane Sight in haste and watch his other stats getting wished up by Ifriti, possibly get Ifriti to cast some other standard wishes just to watch those, and maybe at INT 29 he'll be able to make a standing leap to some understanding of how wishes turn into spell forms. Hand-building an emulator of magical physics, or even trying and failing to do that, seems like it is plausibly on the critical path towards his being able to do that later, if anything is. Building his magical simulation of magic would probably be any degree easier if he had Carissa Sevar's kind of spellcraft, but not that much easier, to be honest. He's got his own armillary amulet now. Most of the challenge, fundamentally, is coming up with any system of magical physics with a visible subsystem that emulates an isomorphism of magical physics. Not making the process happen, coming up with any process with that property. Crafting ad hoc supports for holding the systems together. Well, he could in fact go a lot faster between trials and errors if he was better at crafting spell silver into magical supports and then tweaking the crafts. But the item crafter he has on hand, in his base, is somebody to whom it takes longer to explain what he's trying to accomplish each time and tweak than it does for him to try the tweaks himself. At least this way he's learning himself, at INT 25, and speeding up at the exact form of crafting he needs to do. He gets another Eagle's Splendor and swaps to his +6 intelligence headband, and yeah, with stats of 27, 20, 23, it feels like he is able to make real progress on a couple of his current challenges, for the few minutes it takes before the Splendor is about to run out, and he has to put his +4 +0 +4 headband back on. Changing ability stats, he suspects, is not actually good for him. Not as bad as swapping wisdom up and down, forming new mental skills and circuits that depend on a certain kind of boosted reflectivity, which then abruptly vanishes, just as his brain was getting used to it. Bumping wisdom up and down is probably literally the worst idea. The worst idea inside the realm of practical ability stat manipulation, to be clear, not the worst idea in full generality. But even intelligence going back and forth between 27 and 25 is maybe not as good for a Dathilani brain as he would have liked in an ideal world. It's time for a conversation that he's really dreading, and if he was significantly less calculating, or less reflective, or had less force of personality, he wouldn't be able to bring himself to say it. He is going to try to explain that he thinks all the changes of ability stats are really not good for him, and then ask Carissa for her headband, more or less for the foreseeable future. She can have all of his own augmentation items. They can spend even more money on wisdoms and splendors, but if the time she's bought is going to mean anything, and if it's considered a good thing that he holds himself together, he needs a constant stat block, and he needs that stat block to have INT 27. There's not really any other obvious way to achieve that, unless he's missing something. It's not even obvious that it would be an especially good idea for him to take off the headband. Her headband, Carissa's headband, for which she sold her soul, while he is sleeping. He'd tell him to get lost, but Carissa has surprised him before. She is stronger than he.
How's it going?
He will lay out the situation. He needs INT 27, not INT 25. He could probably benefit from more wisdom, but bouncing wisdom up and down is likely to be bad for his brain. Dropping to Splendor 19 isn't likely to be good for him either. Bouncing ability stats up and down in general seems plausibly to have not been good for him, possibly very not good for him. Here are some expected utility calculations his INT 25 self tried to do from the Carissa/Pharasma point of view, double-checked for a few minutes of INT 27, though this is more of a wisdom-laden task, and he has not dared to augment wisdom yet. The primary point is that he can in fact get to INT 27 using his +6 intelligence headband and get work done that way, and would have to do that, and would do that, to get the basic capabilities he needs. He would just probably damage his emotional and mental stability in the course of doing that. He will keep his voice very dispassionate and his face expressionless, as best as Splendor 23 can boost a Dathilani doing that. Showing any emotions to Carissa would be emotion bombing her, under the circumstances. The underlying extent to which he is holding his sanity hostage against her, even as not technically a threat, is horrible enough already.
You want the headband.
For the foreseeable future, which is now less foreseeable after extending their intended work time. He has a complete set of individually +6 headbands, a +4+0+4 headband, a +2+2+2 headband. He can pour any non-project torpedoing or non-hand-tipping amount of resources into acquiring more scrolls of Owl's Wisdom or Eagle's Splendor. Carissa Seaver is not as restricted as himself if she wants to try renting the Pharaoh's +4+4+4 or finding somewhere to buy a +6+6.
Okay, some considerations. 1, I want to show up and encourage my cults in Vudra and in the Kalesh Empire and in various other places. I suspect it improves the odds of Pharasma working with you, or the odds I don't get squished mid-ascension or something in the genre. I think I need to be wearing the headband for that for maximum credibility. I could conceivably do that right now and give it to you later today after 20 hours of cult cultivating, or I could conceivably do it while you sleep, if you're all right with me having it while you sleep. But it'll be bad, I think, if I don't get to do it at all. 2, I do think things will go better if you're smarter. I also think they'll go better if I'm smarter. And separately from benefits of me being smarter, I think they'll go better if I, am someone you respect and listen to. And I think we're kind of already on the fringe on that front. And if you're notably lots smarter than me, you won't in fact listen to me at all. And I'm scared that'll make things overall go worse. I'd agree in a heartbeat if you'd agree not to go ahead with the overall plan without my say-so. Not expecting you to agree to that, just trying to figure out sufficient conditions and might as well name the obvious one. I think I'd agree if you agreed to let some worlds live that seemed not quite worth it to you, but close enough you weren't sure. Some marginal ones. I don't know what agreeing to that would look like. And, most of what I'm using wisdom for is not getting really mad at you every time you open your mouth. So if you were able to do that on your end, maybe I could just do the headband of intelligence and it'd be fine. But I know it's hard on you when you feel like you're the only one reaching across the divide. And I really wouldn't be able to do much of that without the wisdom headband. It's hard even wearing it.
I could do the marginal thing. Don't expect to run into many marginal cases, but if I do, sure. It's funny how now and then, and despite a lot of things, I get the feeling that you are in some deep sense a better person than I am. I mean, Carmen probably wouldn't even think it was funny. She'd just say, sure, Carissa would have grown up to be a much better person than you, given better circumstances, and now that's starting to shine through. I would not be very surprised if a good solution here ends up looking like my staying mostly out of your way for the next 10 days subjective, pending a trip to the City of Brass where you get your baseline wisdom wished up. After that point, we'll both be INT 29, and it will be quite a subversion of my expectations if we end up talking to each other the same way after that. I don't trust my brain to be okay while I sleep, if transient scaffolding for my cognitive reflectivity gets erased while I'm doing that. Let's front-load the Vudra and Kalesh visits. Do you expect to be okay with 6 points of sudden wisdom loss? I can try to locate a +4+4+0 artifact headband on an emergency basis while you're touring the local meetups of your fan club, but you'd be at less than max intelligence, so I don't even know if you would.
I think I'd rather have intelligence. Wizards usually go much harder on intelligence, and it works fine so long as you can also be kind of an emotionally insensitive jerk, and you generally can, if you're a powerful wizard. I'm not trying to be good here. I'm just trying to survive. I'm just in a weird situation where they're the same thing.
I'll let Carmen be the one to call bullshit on that. You'll probably believe it more coming from her.
Okay, I'm going to go do cult cultivation then. I'm going to burn something like 50,000 GP in scrolls on looking cool, and you are not allowed to complain about this at all.
Wasn't even slightly considering it. Off with you. You need to talk to some of the people correctly relying on you for salvation, non-good person. Notably missing from Carissa's compact with him. A specification saying that, if he does release Rovagug, Carissa shall not at this time be prevented from escaping to Elysium or the Maelstrom. Both of those planes are supposedly infinite, and the Maelstrom in particular is supposed to ultimately head off into the chaos outside Pharasma's bubble, which would make it much more likely that you could escape Rovagug, starting from there. He's not suggesting this clause, if she hasn't thought of it, because Carissa might at that point demand that clause in order to not fight it out with her own self-image, which clause would then potentially hamper her actually saving the multiverse, and also force her to think of herself as a worse person. It's just funny because Carissa's real emotional priorities being what they actually are, she hasn't thought of it.
Well, you can't risk the entire multiverse for the sake of being more likely to survive its destruction. If she were literally any of the other trillions of people in the multiverse, she'd be so mad at herself for even contemplating that trade. Anyway, teleport and Fool's Teleport and Dimension Door and Damnation Stride and Firefall and lots of Vision of Hell prepared. Check. Scrolls to cast. Telepathy, Overland Flight, Spell Resistance, Programmed Image, Cloak of Winds, Getaway, Life Bubble, Contingent, Teleport, Mage Armor, Spell Immunity, Greater Spell Immunity. Check. Some of these are necessary for her plans, some just sounded like fun. And when is she going to get the chance to use the most bizarre spells Keltham's shoppers could find anywhere on the planet, if not now? Is there anyone here who's been to Vudra? I guess whoever did all this shopping must have gone.
That would be him. Keltham has made his services hired on a monthly basis available for this little trip.
Great. Does he happen to know anything about her cult in Vudra? She's happy to just be taken to a major city, but if he knows where to start, they can do that.
He has not particularly been looking into that, no. Among many other reasons not to. It's suspected by Keltham of being a Caden intervention, and therefore nobody is to talk to him about it.
Fine. Where's your teleport to...
I can do Indapata, the capital. Niswan in Jalmaray. Sumadadra, the most important port city for their trade with Tianxia. Those seem the most promising places to find your cult. I could also, for example, teleport you to the undead-haunted palace of Ivory and Bone, but I do not imagine that you are interested in such more exotic destinations on this trip.
Let's do Indapata. I think the undead are probably an unreceptive audience for pitches about how if you help me conquer the world, you'll have eternal glory in hell.
Redul sets aside his distaste at the thought of a talented wizard embracing this nonsense. It is his foolishness, not hers. If he imagines that Savar ought not to take advantage of such ready offerings, teleport to Indapata.
Indapata, Yarwain. Indapata, as it appears to the casual visitor, is not the largest city Savar will have seen, for she has seen Dis. It will not be the prettiest single place she's seen, for she's seen Abigail's quarters within the Imperial Palace. Nonetheless, Savar will have seen nowhere larger and more beautiful than Indapata. Indapata is laid out like the concentric petals of a lotus in circles of diminishing wealth. The innermost blossom, called also the ninth circle or flower of Indapata, is the Imperial Palace. Redul's teleport location is a discreet nook between two fine brick buildings in the sixth circle of Indapata, the north-northeast petal of that ring of the lotus. In the sixth circle of the city there are, if not the fabled palaces and menageries, at least fine gardens and streets of gleaming white stone. Here you would find successful adventurers, expensive inns open to foreigners, homes for the higher tier of merchants short of the princes of merchant houses, shops that trade some of the more expensive things that can be bought with ordinary money. Within sight of the nook, a robed monk sits chanting verses beneath a well-tended tree growing up from a deliberate gap in the stone streets. There is no begging hat set out before her. The nearby places of business are paying her to chant those verses, as another land might hire a skilled singer to play a harp. The monk's presence shows that this is a wealthy and lawful place, where a refined traveler might safely seek to do business or find rest in a nearby inn.
Cool. If you'd seen the world, Keltham, maybe then you would know that on every corner of it there is a fully sufficient reason you shouldn't destroy it. But of course, that's not how Keltham works, and not, if she's scrupulously careful with her own internal muddles, precisely what she thinks either. She would take some chance of destroying this city to fix hell. You do actually have to be able to trade things against one another if you want to have anything at all. Carissa will cast the last of her scrolls so that she can have more spells about her as she enters the nearest inn. She's told her sleeves of many garments to imitate Keltham's clothes, except tailored to her. Dath Ilan may be horrible, but they sure can do textiles. She's not concealing the crown.
All conversation halts, naturally. She's a foreigner, she's wearing an obvious crown, she's the prettiest person anybody there has ever seen. Any of these qualities alone would halt all conversation. One man, possibly dressed as a monk, it's hard to tell as a foreigner entering this land for the first time, who's dressed as a Vudrani monk and who's just dressed as a Vudrani, is staring at her crown and then leans over and whispers something to the man sitting next to him, whose eyes widen.
Oh, good. That's the reaction she was hoping for, but she didn't want to count on it. Who appears to be in charge here?
Possibly the overmuscled man folding sheets of food into more complicated structures of food, in a tiny kitchenette visible to the bottom floor of the inn. At least he's the only person who looks like he works here, and he does not, by jewelry about himself, look poorly paid.
She wants to eat all of the foods of the world and learn all of the customs and ask so many questions and meet so many people. Not the time. She'll walk over to the man who seemed to recognize her. Not terribly close, both because that might seem threatening and because she doesn't mind if this conversation is heard, but close enough she's unambiguously speaking to him. "Forgive me," she says, "but I am new to this city and know only in the vaguest of terms who I seek within it. May I ask you to help me find it? I cannot say that I am not dangerous, but no one of any land or any faith will be weaker for coming to my attention in the long run."
Meaning no offense to the great lady, we have our own business to be about, says cautiously the man sitting next to the one who stared at her crown, the one to whom the starer whispered. You look like great wealth, but also like great complications to one's ordinary daily life.
I am that. Does the one who maybe recognized her have a different opinion?
His eyes are flickering about the other magic items that Sever wears, looking impressed. Possibly this is somebody who can see magic? Anybody like that would rather notice her crown of mithril, a lesser artifact shining with magic as though a full moon reflected from every part of it.
She'll speak to him then. I am looking for my faithful, those lawful evil followers of Carissa Savar, who think that hell could be something more. If they have exercised enough initiative to have a temple of their own, I want to find it. If they do not, I want to rent a public space, a courtyard or an amphitheater or a stadium, where I may spend the day and they may come and find me if they dare.
The language spoken in Indapata does not distinguish God pronouns, as Sever may realize as she speaks the words. I don't know much about the Severian faith except that it's very new, says the man she addressed. Maybe the seventh ring would have an ashram of her followers if there's one in Indapata. The other man, who can't see magic, ahems and speaks in a lower voice. The city authorities are unsettled about the Severites, as a lawful evil faith claiming to be subject to hell. I believe it was announced recently that they are permitted to gather, but only under the supervision of priests of other recognized faiths, particularly Irori, as it's said that Savar was herself a priest of Irori before renouncing him as Irorians do. I would ask of a temple of Irori in the seventh ring, did I seek them.
Thank you, but my ignorance is even greater than you imagine. Which way would I go to find myself in the seventh ring?
Were you that new to this place, I'd seek a guide, says the one who can see magic. I don't know where a guide might be found. In this ring they keep these streets free of urchins. The owner may know. He indicates the man running the kitchenette of folding food squares.
Sure. Do you know, sir, where I could find a guide in this city?
To her sense motive he seems nervous, but perhaps that's only natural in her presence. Most guides, even upper-class ones, would usually be hired in the city's outermost ring, the Orison, about one of the entrances. By the time you come to his inn, it's assumed that you know where you are. Leaving his inn, A block to the right, there'd be a merchant's bank. A block to the left, a hiring office for miscellany, including of adventurers. Either of those might know where to find a guide. He could also try his own hand at giving directions if the place she seeks is not far, and she could ask of any monks she sees if she becomes lost. Relatively few people dressed as monks are fakes who will try to guide travelers into traps. Even fewer would dare try it on herself and her dire-looking escort.
She is looking for a temple of Irori in the 7th ring, if he thinks he could give directions there.
There's 9 turns in the directions he gives. Not something difficult to intelligence 18+6 as her headband boosts intelligence, assuming this guy got all the turns correct.
Yep, no problem. Probably, unless it's an assassination plot or something, in which case she should still be fine. There are beings who could assassinate her before reduel and she can teleport out, but not many. And anyway, if she gets assassinated, she prevents the destruction of the universe. So while she can't work towards it, she can't actually make herself fear it. 9 turns if they're where they're supposed to be.
The guard posted about this entrance to the 7th circle of Indapata does respectfully inquire of this wealthy-looking, magical-looking, incredibly beautiful foreigner what she seeks there.
I am told that the following of Carissa Savar is directed in this place to gather under supervision, and that I should seek them or more about them at a temple of Irori. I therefore seek one.
He looks considerably more nervous of her now, but grants her entrance. In the 7th circle of Indapata, as seen from this entrance, there are mansions, exorbitant-looking brothels. A fenced-off garden is set about with 100 species of flowers. A few isolated pavilions within glow to her arcane sight with silencing magics, though they don't quite look like the Avastani standard version of that. Nothing that looks like an Avastani temple, at least not to her immediate vision. Following the innkeep's directions will take her down a long, slightly curving wide road from this entrance gate, tracing the inner edges of the 7th ring of lotus petals. Probably not the fastest way to get to her destination, but plausibly the simplest way if you didn't want somebody to need to follow even more turns.
She doesn't actually mind sightseeing, though she suspects Reduel does. Maybe after she does this, she should do some magic item crafting with him to show him she's competent and not just a charlatan.
Reduel doesn't look bored, but doesn't look like anything particularly not bored either. First time out of Cheliax, accepting the world wound, he says. And of course that brief trip to Osirion.
And hell, I haven't done a lot of tourism on this plane, though.
Don't expect the rest of it to look this nice. Only a few places. I do highly recommend Quantium. There is not much to Nex, but what there is lovely.
I want to visit Nex after I have talked things through with Keltham, and am qualified to feel smug about how we handled our differences much better than Nex and Geb did theirs.
I do believe that is literally the lowest bar on a successful relationship that I have ever heard of, and I hope you'll forgive my frankness when I say that I wish to hear no more of it.
That's an impressive degree of incuriosity, given the stakes, which of course he has no idea of, because they've hidden it from him.
Whatever.
Where's the Temple of Irori?
They do appear to be entering the more religious section of the 7th circle now. It is theoretically equal in social rank to the mansions and expensive brothels, but you have to go through a gate to get there, one that looks like it would be rather more guarded going the other way. There are no beggars in the streets here either, no urchins, but also not quite the same quality of carefully tended garden as was in the 6th ring. It is known even in Avastan to those Avastani who have learned anything at all of Vudra, that the Master of Masters is to this empire as Asmodeus to Cheliax, in the sense of not being thought mightier than Pharasma, but understood to be preeminent god of this land and its pantheon. If Savar knows that much, she may correctly guess that the elaborate many-tiered building looming above all others in this lotus petal is dedicated to Irori. Plausibly, continuing to follow this road and taking a right as directed would take her there in time.
Also, she can fly.
She'll attract much attention that way, obviously, though not of an obviously dangerous-looking sort. Fewer do fly about these streets than in Absalom. In almost no time at all, then, she's before an elaborate many-tiered building that has been decorated, but not weakly. There is nothing about this building that is thin, pretty in a way that is fragile. All ornamentation is wrought in metal, and thickly enough that you could envision a hurricane sweeping this temple and leaving it essentially unscathed. In the outer courtyard of what appears to be the temple's entrance, there is a tall statue of Irori, such as Irori is now reputed, this long time hence, to have appeared in his mortal life. You must look hard to see that he is muscular beneath the simple robes he wears. He strikes no pose. The statue is clad in metal and colored as some metals may be colored by searing flame of carefully controlled temperature. It is colored, this statue, but not with paint that could be worn away by time or hurricanes. Obviously, those who truly understand Irori would consider this immense foolishness even so, but some effort has been made to annoy them less. Whatever business the many people in this courtyard were about will be negated by Carissa Seaver flying here, followed by Redul a respectful distance behind her. Some gape openly. Some do cast her more measured and dignified glances. At least one of the people gaping at her unabashed looks like she might be a senior monk.
She'll land at the base of the statue. Senior monk it is, if she can correctly identify monks. I am seeking the dedicates of Carissa Seaver, whose faith, I have been told, is asked to operate subject to the guidance of the Irorian faith here.
I wouldn't call it guidance, more that our faith was asked to take responsibility for permitting such as is to be permitted. As such, I'll ask you why you seek them, and also I'm curious what brings you here out of Avestan for it. I'd thought Avestan the center of Severism.
I am Carissa Sevar. Everyone goes to the same hell, so I don't see why it should be a faith of any specific nation.
Well, I was going to send you about your way with a younger monk to guide you, but, why don't I go with you along the way and ask a number of questions I'm suddenly extremely curious about, whose answers, I'll warn you, I've no doubt I'll be repeating to a number of others.
You are welcome to accompany me and to say anything you heard of me to anyone who will hear it.
The monk turns about and heads out from the courtyard, striding at exactly the quick speed that Carissa was flying when she came here. Are you a renunciate priest of Irori, to start, and do you also say as much in Avestan? For that rumor is recent and seems to me suspiciously chosen for Vudra.
It's true, but I've never said so save in Dis itself. Other powers have intervened to take word of me around the world, and I imagine they chose the words that would be most persuasive. I do not know them to have spread anything false.
That sounds like it must be part of a fascinating story. Do you also attest that you have a compact with Asmodeus that gives you all souls pledged to you out of creation if only you can conquer it?
Wait, how do they know?
Well, Caden could have just told someone.
There's all Aspexia's and Abrogale's desperate efforts at secrecy confounded. Do you, Carissa Sevar, conquer territories or hearts in Hell's name? Be you fairly judged by Hell's Prince to be the most prime mover in such conquests, such unsouled and unclarist souls from those lands and peoples as enter into Hell calling your name, in death as they called it in life, and did you and Hell more service than disservice, shall pass into your custody, or the custody of those in Hell you name your slaves or allies. And when you have conquered 3/4 of Avestan, all such souls out of Avestan shall be yours as well. When 3/4 of Golarion is yours, all such souls out of Golarion. When 3/4 of this plane is yours, all such souls out of this plane. When 3/4 of Pharasma's creation is yours, all such souls out of creation. While Hell's dominions of those lands and peoples last, and all this be annulled should you fail finally after death in being acknowledged by Hell as a hellish power, or should the yield in strength and wealth from those souls granted you be less than he accounts as ordinary from his subservient powers of Hell? Or should the Prince of Hell fairly judge you to have entered his despite in death or life? She says, with the accurate air of someone called on to recite these precise words frequently.
And the foremost principle of your doctrine is the anathema of any soul being destroyed or ending. You promise mercy to your followers in Hell foremost because you fear that otherwise they might seek destruction in Abaddon.
That's not descriptively all that false of me, but it's not at all how I'd make the core argument. First of all, there's no mercy in Hell, and no one should go there wanting it. I can make them stronger, better, more capable, and more alive than anywhere else will make them, and they should come to me for that. Secondly, the way I'd make the core argument is, outside places like Cheliax, who goes to Hell? Who do you think of as the prototypical example of a person you'd be unsurprised to learn found their way there after trial?
Someone who thought themselves aimed for Axis, but who greatly deluded themselves, as mortals do, about how good all their actions would be judged by Pharasma to be at trial. Perhaps because they thought they had reasons. Perhaps they did have reasons, but not the kind Pharasma cares about.
Yes. It is rare for a person who isn't deluded, who is agentic and ambitious and acting in their own interests and not lying to themselves, to go to Hell. It has little to offer them. Cheliax is Asmodeus's experiment in creating a society that sends even its ambitious and interesting and competent people to hell. It's a very expensive experiment, but I wouldn't call it a failed one. But what then is hell made up of? What is the material he shapes into devils? People who were lying to themselves, or easily lied to, or who never bothered thinking about their afterlife at all. People who weren't very strategic. Asmodeus doesn't directly know how to fix this. I suspect he knows that the things that make mortals useful also make them harder for him to see. I suspect he's dissatisfied with the results he gets from his extraordinary expenditures. But it's not the tragic situation it might appear at first glance, where this situation serves Asmodeus, but not mortals, so the stupider or more careless mortals lose and Asmodeus wins. It is worse both for Asmodeus and for mortals than a situation where hell is a place people go on purpose and where it can use their strength and make them stronger.
He stays on track for Axis, pending fully figuring out his Lich ascension, by checking with regular early judgment and routinely donating to Iomede's church. Before meeting Keltum, Redul murdered a few extra people so he'd detect lawful evil to Keltum, whose notice insisted on that for whatever weird reason. Obviously, he's running the most absurdly expensive form of true resurrection insurance for the length of his employment. After it ends, Redul will donate enough to Iomede's church to get back on track for Axis, using a fraction of Keltum's payment. Not that Keltum knows any of this, of course.
I assume you've worked out the rather obvious interpretation of events where Asmodeus has compacted with you entirely to deceive people into doing the evil they always wished and held back from, once they have hope for hell. Backed by your hopeful following, you conquer some lesser nation in hell's name and destabilize a number of others, and finally fail to be judged a hellish power because your reasons were not cruel enough for hell.
Yes, that would serve Asmodeus well, and me not at all. I expect that on some level he's hoping for it, even if the utter triumph of my plans would serve him even better, because he loves it when things work out that way. I, of course, think he underestimates me, even correcting for the fact that he wants me to think that, and underestimates more broadly what's afoot on Galerion, where all the gods can hardly see it all.
I now believe the part where you're in fact Carissa Seaver and a renunciate priest of Irori at least. Either that or you managed to practice the part by studying Irorians of some true depth and aimed at convincing other real Irorians.
I've actually only met one other Irorite. It's a banned faith in Cheliax, you know. I didn't know renouncing Irori was a significant step in his faith. I just needed him out of my way so I could sell my soul for that compact, this headband, 15 wishes, and some other things I needed for the next steps of my plans.
It heartens me on some level to know that we mortals can still get up to such nonsense with prophecy shattered and no more heroes out of prophecy. You could see it as proving that, of all the trouble older heroes got into, at least some of that trouble was properly their own doing.
Or Caden's. Whatever. It's been an eventful few months since the God War, she agrees. That was mostly not my fault, to be clear.
I perceive you to follow in the way, then, of the seventh head abbot of the line of Avarcanesia, who summed up his doctrine thus. There was a point where we should have stopped, and we have clearly passed it, so let's keep going and see what happens.
Not far wrong. Anyway, now there are people praying to me. I can't stop here.
I would never dream of telling you to stop here, not least because if I did, you would never listen. So said he who'd become the eighth abbot to the seventh. I do suspect you could benefit from reading some proper books of Irorian doctrine, as much as it is obviously far, far, far too late for that advice. There come now to a part of this lotus petal where there are less impressive buildings, and young people about the streets dressed in cheap robes. Before them is a long single-tier building whose door is marked also with Irori's symbol, built of ill-mortared stone such as wouldn't survive a hurricane and ornamented in a way that will not stand time's ravages. If you know anything of Irori's way, you know that Irori as a mortal would sooner be found here than in his mighty temple, if there was anything here to learn. In the rear courtyard of this place, the Severites are permitted to gather and train, and a second circle of Irori watches over it, the older monk says.
How many are there, approximately?
The largest gathering on Severism in Indapata is said to have attracted a crowd of thousands, but only a fraction of those would have been your faithful. And how many are here I couldn't guess. I only know that this place is where to send those seeking.
Want me to have a look?
Sure.
Redul vanishes, and not even to arcane sight is there any trace of him. A couple of rounds later, his voice announces that there are 24 in the rear courtyard, 4 with alignment auras, 2 of those lawful evil, and 2 lawful neutral.
Well, it's a start. She will cast some more spells for the purpose of having lots of spells about her. What further purpose would be needed? And fly on in.
At this time of day, most in Indapata are about their other businesses, so the courtyard contains a mix of those who have no other businesses for whatever reason. Half of those present wear the robes of aspiring initiates to the way of one god or another. Relatively nicer robes, the robes of those who have sponsors who can afford to spend their day in search of themselves, or at least somebody with some vague outward resemblance to themselves. Teenagers, for the most part. The crowd skews heavily male. A visibly pregnant woman is a visible exception. A man who looks retired, both in the sense of no longer working in his occupation and also being tired again after he was already tired, is an exception to the rule that the crowd skews young. Formerly, the crowd's focus of attention was on a tiny woman, not a halfling, but not that much taller, who was holding forth in lecture. As the stunningly beautiful crowned woman drops in out of the sky, of course, all attention shifts to her.
She casts Vision of Hell. It's a 50-foot radius. It should get the whole crowd.
That'll get a lot of screaming and around half the crowd starting to run away. A number of people in this crowd have made their will saves, but a fair number of those have also decided they have urgent business elsewhere.
Yep. If they run away screaming at the sight of hell, they should, in fact, probably run away. If they have common sense and are departing because this situation looks plausibly deadly, then that is not strongly indicative they should run away. She takes the spell down. Perhaps I have come to the wrong place. I was told that here I would find Indapata's acolytes of Carissa Savar.
The older man present, the one who looks retired, is completing the gestures of detect magic. A moment later, seeing much magic about her and little illusion, he kneels. "Some of yours are here, Lady Savar," he speaks loudly. "Only a few of your best. We can send for more, but it will take time. Those who fled are largely already gone, for good or ill. It does not take that many seconds to empty yourself from a courtyard, even one transformed into a hellscape." The pregnant woman, who was not running that swiftly, halts at the sound of this and turns about. The older monk whom Sever followed here is now also present. There is a profoundly skeptical look about her, but she does not speak.
If it will take time, then it is best begun at once.
Seek you the few who lead or the many who follow?
I'll speak to anyone who wants to listen, however much they strike you as having any real potential. If they were playing a game, they may as well realize that about themselves as quickly as possible.
If it is those with potential, I can have perhaps a dozen here for you in an hour. Many are about their work. Do you come as the sun sets to another place of meeting? It can be 50. Did you announce your place and time of return to all? It would be a great crowd. The Grand Merchant Taravand has sustained your cause here, and he would be sorely disappointed to miss you. He is now about his work, but I expect very interruptible by Carissa Seaver.
I'll come at sunset to a place, if you name it. I don't know this city. I cannot commit to return another day. Should that change, I'll tell you when to expect me.
I will conduct you there, that you may return. Will you speak with Grand Merchant Taravand before then?
Yes, tell me about him.
Anashala Iarwain. Your pardon? Says the small woman who was lecturing. I understood yours was a lawful faith. The regulations of Indapata require Severites to have a ranking member of lawful neutral clergy present when they gather, one who assumes responsibility for that gathering's activities.
The woman herself has a lawful aura, as might be that of a person powerful in their own right, or a cleric of second circle. Are you the person who has assumed responsibility for the activities here?
I was.
Do you have interest in continuing in that responsibility, or should I find someone else?
My interest was in the methods of reasoning that your faith teaches, as are said to make your followers more useful to you in life, and swifter to be molded into more powerful devils after their death. While your followers were peacefully gathering to learn those methods, as to be frank seemed to me to be readily strippable of evil, I was ready enough to supervise and participate. If that is to change, I will be no longer willing. Either way, I am not willing to take responsibility for the sunset gathering you propose. I'm curious, but based on events so far, I could not tell the city I knew no harm would come of it. Carissa's sense motive will say that this person is terrified, but doing a good job of covering that. Her eyes flicker frequently to the more senior monk who is lurking nearby and not saying or doing anything.
It's farther than she expected them to get on their own. She's suddenly desperately curious what the lecture she interrupted was about. But it's not fair, actually, to ask the woman to tell her about it while terrified. I don't know, no harm will come of it, but greater harm, I think, will come of my staying away. Thank you for your service to my following. I do not imagine that their purposes will change in the upcoming months, but if they do, they will be expected to conduct themselves such that you do not regret having been their sponsor. To her guide. Would you, or do you know any who might assume responsibility for our gathering this evening?
I shall. Let's keep going and see what happens. The man who knelt to her speaks again after a moment where Sever could have spoke did she so choose. Grand Merchant Taravand is the patriarch of the Taravand trading house, which deals much in slaves. He would not yet call himself one of your faithful. He backs us not for the Severite reasoning methods, but because he is intrigued by the possibility of a place in hell that would appeal to him. I can tell you more of him along the way.
We should depart in a moment, then. Who owns this building?
The Irori faith owns it, he says. It's managed by Abhishek, a first circle of Irori. The senior present at this time of day would be Dhyana, who teaches meditation. The pregnant woman has now approached nearby and stands with hands folded in the manner of one waiting to speak. Her robes on a close examination are of relatively higher quality. Obviously, a number of relatively courageous others are handing not too far back as well.
I would like to pay them for leave to inscribe something on the walls of this courtyard. Can they be fetched for that? And she turns her attention to the pregnant woman.
My baby's father is in hell. His death was unexpected. We'd planned to buy his way out later. Your faith is silent on the matter. They say they don't know one way or the other, but I thought some people say you'd maybe provide a place, even for people like him who weren't your faithful in life. I wouldn't want to go to hell myself, even to be with him, but I'd give your faith almost anything else it wanted, to earn his place in shelter, if there was any shelter to be found in hell.
Only in lands I've conquered do even my faithful come to me for now. I have bought some other souls, for my own reasons, but I paid a price much higher than a resurrection. If you don't wish to sell your soul for his, I have nothing to offer that's in your means.
The pregnant woman bows to her as deeply as a pregnant woman can manage. Thank you for your honesty, Carissa Sivar, she says. Your faith is a lawful one, and I will always speak well of it. She turns and goes from the Severite gathering.
Hell deals in souls and little else. Anyone who wants to purchase the safety of a loved one at that price can probably have it. At no other price can it be purchased, until much has changed. Where is she on permission to carve on the wall?
Here's a woman coming forth that's obviously the meditation teacher, if you can read Vudrani dress codes. To Chelish sensibilities, she reads as openly terrified. About Dhyana, somebody said that Carissa Sivar, you wanted to pay us for something?
This is the place where my following studies, and I want to carve onto the wall the words of my compact with Asmodeus, so that falsehoods that spread about it can be corrected, and no one hopes of things that won't come, or fears to believe in things that will. If it is your wall I'd carve on, I'll compensate you.
I don't know how we'd price that, begins Dhyana. If you want it to endure for only a year, a gold piece will do, says the more senior monk. Depending on how things go, I shouldn't wonder if it endures for quite a longer time than that.
A year is long enough for now. She hands over a gold piece, steps back, and casts stone shape to put it on the wall in Infernal. Whether there should be a Vudrani translation, or whether you'd rather it take comprehend languages and be read in the original, I'll leave up to you.
Nobody seems to have anything to say to that. The man who knelt to her has been instructing a few others present while this goes on, and they've scattered. The others, presumably, are those he deems without potential. Does Carissa Sivar have anything to say to those unfortunates before she departs?
Sure. She'll ask them about themselves and what brought them here and what they'd do if they were competent to do anything they set their minds to.
The Severite reasoning method seemed very lawful and maybe like a missing piece of Irarism up until that point. He has no interest in evil, if that's all right. He is studying to be a monk, and if he were competent to do anything, would be a more powerful monk. It was sort of the new thing, and he was bored. He would not usually say this to an up-and-coming deity, but the Severite faith teaches inferiors to be honest with superiors, and superiors not to punish honesty from inferiors. If he could do anything, he'd ascend to godhood like Irori, obviously. Carissa Sivar sounded like she was actually going places and doing things, unlike a lot of monks and priests around here. If you condition on sticking around Indapata, you get some pretty uninteresting monks and priests, in his own opinion. Except for a few very high-ranking ones who don't have time for him, he feels completely vindicated by the fact that Carissa Sivar actually showed up here in person. That said, he's got, like, zero interest in going to hell, no offense. He'd travel the world killing things that ought to be dead. With a few exceptions, like the pregnant lady who just left, men never do their fair share of the infanticide, and it's always just the women who end up in hell. She's got no realistic way of buying her way out from under that now. If she could do anything, she'd be rich enough to buy herself an atonement, and do the same for other women who had to kill their babies when they were young. He's always wanted to be evil, and would totally be evil if there was any acceptable afterlife option you could get as a result. If he was competent to do anything, he'd conquer a country, rule it as a tyrant, harem, slaves, all of that.
Well, it's not hopeless. She bets Irori is so annoyed about people whose ambition is to ascend like Irori, but that's Irori's problem and he can solve it himself. They can be a test audience, then, for Carissa to explain the current state of affairs, where the weak or the foolish go to hell, those who have no other choices, and how this should injure the pride of Asmodeus and the credibility of his church. How unfortunate is Asmodeus's situation, for it is not in his nature to make any concessions to mortal frailty, and yet without any he is denied the greater part of mortal strength, and his church is left asserting that Asmodeus will conquer all the other afterlives eventually, which, come on now, anyone with Severite mind training should see the problem at once. Gods should not have common knowledge of disagreement on a question of fact, and if Irori and Asmodeus differ in what they tell their churches, no one's going to believe it's Irori who's the liar. Asmodeus is not exactly vulnerable as a product of these circumstances. He will not lose his position. He is just weaker and less worthy of respect and deference than he wishes he were, and he has little avenue to change it. Or he had little avenue until Savar came to him with the compact, which she thinks he granted mostly just to amuse himself. It is not in Asmodeus's nature to make concessions to mortal frailty, but it is in his nature to award prizes for his service and to derive from his bargains greater benefit than was initially imagined. And so now, if all goes well, he'll have mortals who are better, stronger, more interesting, more capable, because hell will stop being a place where mortals go only if they have no alternative. People like the acolyte who has always wanted to be evil will get to live their evil dreams. As for the rest of them, perhaps they'd go to that greater hell, or perhaps they wouldn't. But if they did, Carissa would make sure they became great, and that when they looked back, they'd either be glad of their choice or glad they didn't get one. Questions?
What is your hell going to be like exactly if all this works? Do you have an unholy symbol? If our doctrine is that only the weak and foolish go to hell, I worry that'll offend a lot of people who'd otherwise support us.
Oh, good point. She needs an unholy symbol. She puts up a minor illusion and fiddles with it thoughtfully. I'm damned to hell, she says as she does so. Everyone I respect and admire is damned to hell. But there are many who should join us, or who should spend their lives growing in strength and confidence and power, who spend it instead fearing, denying, or trying to claw their way out of hell, or obediently never doing the evil they yearn to for the sake of their eternal soul. I do not call them weak or foolish, but their lives are not well spent, compared to a world where they could go to hell and be better off for it. I want to make better devils using the Alani methods. Devils who have the creativity Asmodeus saw no way to build into them. Devils who are competent and ruthless and interesting, whose pride is in their achievements and whose achievements make hell glorious. I cast vision of hell earlier, and people fled in terror, but there is no reason they should not be transfixed in wonder. Asmodeus is not the god of torture, but of tyranny. I will build a kingdom so wealthy, so powerful, so extraordinary, you would rather be a slave in it than free to wander all the rest of the outer planes.
Irori was slave to no one. You can be lawful without having anyone else in charge of you, and that's what I aspire to be. Can we have any authoritative words on a maximum amount of torture in your hell, possibly? If we don't have that, it's sort of unnerving given the reputation that hell has about being tricky. I thought you were a renunciate priest of Irori. Doesn't that mean you respected and admired Irori? He didn't go to hell.
None of mine will wish they hadn't come to me. How much hurt they can withstand and end up stronger will vary from person to person. My relationship with Irori is that he cleriqued me, I proceeded on my path, and then I realized I needed to sell my soul and compact with Asmodeus, and I told him to stand aside. I have not had occasion yet to decide what I think of him. You can be lawful without having anyone in charge of you. but you can't actually be mine without having me in charge of you. If you want to take the crumbs I drop and run off in your own direction with them, I will not stop you.
If you wish to support this AI reading and others like it, please visit patreon.com/AskWhoCastsAI. Any help is appreciated. And thank you to executive producer John Doe 7776059.